Glad to know you're still with us right here on Real Broadcasting Network. Of course, let's get the program underway as we'll begin with a question that may sound uncomfortable, but it goes to the very heart of justice in any society. If you are arrested today, God forbid, and that's what you're going to say as a Nigerian, for an offense you insist you did not commit, how long would you expect to wait before a court decides your fate? A few days? A couple of months, perhaps a year. Now imagine waiting 3 years, 5 years, or even longer without a conviction, without a trial be concluded, and without knowing when your freedom might come. Now, this is a case for thousands of Nigerians that isn't a hypothetical situation. It is their daily reality. Fresh figures released by the Nigerian Correctional Service show that as of February this year, there were 80,812 inmates in custodial centers across the country. Out of that number, 51,955 were awaiting trial, representing about 64% of the entire prison population. In other words, nearly 2 out of every 3 people in the correctional center have not been convicted by any court of law.
Can you believe that? Over 60%? Now, let's be very clear. Awaiting trial does not automatically mean innocent, though, and it certainly does not mean guilty either. Under Section 36 of Nigeria's Constitution, every person charged with a criminal offense is presumed innocent until proven guilty by a competent court of law. That principle is one of the foundations of every democratic justice system. So, when the majority of people behind bars have not been convicted, it raises an important question, and that is, are our correctional centers becoming holding facilities for delayed justice rather than institutions for convicted offenders? So, I think that's exactly where this conversation should begin, because many Nigerians still use the word prisoner and criminal interchangeably, when legally they are not the same thing. Someone awaiting trial is an accused person. The court has not yet determined whether that individual committed the offense. Yet, because of delays within criminal justice system, many of these suspects spend months and, in some cases, years in custody before their cases are concluded. This is really terrible, Ugochukwu.
Yes, Barry, and what's particularly striking is that it isn't a new problem. If you look back over the last 2 decades, virtually every Comptroller General of the Nigeria Prison Service, and now known as the Nigerian Correctional Service, has raised concerns about overcrowding. Chief judges across different states have repeatedly embarked on prison decongestion exercises. We've seen presidential pardons, gubernatorial clemency, special review panels, and judicial interventions. Now, the aim is to reduce the number of inmates. Yet, despite those efforts, the statistics remain stubbornly high. And it tells us something important. Overcrowded prisons are not the disease, they are the symptom. The real problem lies somewhere deeper within the criminal justice system. In fact, if we look at the history of Nigeria's correctional system, prisons were originally established during the colonial era primarily as places of detention and punishment. Over time, there was a growing recognition around the world that correctional facilities should do much more than simply lock people away. They should be able to rehabilitate offenders, equip them with skills, and prepare them to return to society as productive citizens. We've heard of some people who stayed in prison and were able to complete certain courses, finished certain degree programs, acquired one skill or the other. Some people, become better in their behavior and attitude, and that is something that the correctional services is actually supposed to be working on.
And that thinking actually informed the Nigerian Correctional Service Act of 2019. That one replaced the old Nigerian Prisons Service. The emphasis shifted from punishment to correction, to rehabilitation, and even reintegration. But here's where the contradiction lies. Rehabilitation presupposes that a court has established guilt. Now, if the majority of inmates are still awaiting trial, then many of them are occupying spaces meant for correction before the justice system has even determined whether they need correcting. You know, it becomes difficult to talk about rehabilitation when the first challenge is simply, getting people before a judge within a very reasonable time, if you know what I mean.
Indeed. And that brings us to another important point. Whenever stories like this, make it to the headlines, the immediate reaction is often to blame the correctional centers themselves, to say, why is it congested? But correctional officers do not arrest suspects. They do not investigate crimes. They do not prepare case files or prosecute offenders in court. By the time an accused person arrives at a custodial center, several institutions have already played a role, including the police, prosecutors, the court, and in many cases, legal representatives. So it's a chain, it's a process. It's not just one person. So perhaps prison congestion is really a reflection of how efficiently or inefficiently the entire criminal justice system is functioning. Now, if investigations are delayed, if court proceedings are repeatedly adjourned, if witnesses fail to appear, or if bail conditions are impossible to meet, the inevitable result is that more people remain in custody for longer periods, regardless of whether they are eventually found guilty or not. And talk about their legal representative as well. Sometimes they don't even show up. So it's a process.
It's really tough. And that's why legal experts often remind us that justice delayed is not only an injustice to victims, it is also an injustice to defendants. Because every unnecessary adjournment has consequences, Every poorly investigated case has consequences too. Every missing case file, every unburdened or overburdened courtroom, and every avoidable delay adds another name to an already overcrowded correctional facility. And when people talk about prison congestion, they often imagine a shortage of cells. But that's not the issue. Perhaps the biggest shortage is time. Time that is lost waiting for investigations to be completed. Time that is lost waiting for court dates. And in many cases, time that innocent people can never recover, even if they are eventually discharged.
Well, perhaps one of the biggest revelations in this report came from the Minister of Interior, Lubumi Tunji-Ojo. Now, according to him, 93% of inmates in Nigeria's correctional centers are being held for offenses under state laws, while only 7% are federal offenders. He also revealed that when the current administration carried out an audit of correctional facilities after resuming office, officials discovered about 4,000 inmates who were in custody over fines and compensation orders of less than 500,000 naira. Now, that immediately raises another question. If government is spending hundreds of thousands of naira every year feeding an inmate whose original fine was less than 500,000, are we really achieving justice? Or are we simply transferring the cost of the problem to the taxpayers? And going as far as 500,000 might even be quite generous. We've seen offenders who are in prison for something as little as stealing a bunch of plantain. Not that it's right under the law, stealing is still a crime. But we're looking at how we can further decongest our prisons. And these are all of the issues we have to look at.
Indeed, another issue, that repeatedly comes up is bail. On paper, our laws recognize that bail is not meant to punish an accused person. It is simply a guarantee that the defendant will return to court for trial. Yet, many lawyers argue that in practice, some bail conditions have become so stringent that they are almost impossible to satisfy. The report highlights examples of defendants who were granted bail but remain in custody because they were asked to produce highly placed public servants or senior military officers, or as sureties now. Legally, they had been granted freedom, but practically they remained behind bars because they could not meet the conditions attached to that freedom. How many of us even know all of these officers in high places?
Well, sometimes it is very good to be quite careful. I understand that some people get extremely careful, but that's one of the major concerns raised by senior lawyers interviewed in the report that we're considering. They argue that prison congestion doesn't begin at the correctional center. It begins much earlier. Some blame weak police investigations. Others looked at criminalization of civil disputes, repeated adjournments, and even an overburdened court system. They also believe that some offenses that could be resolved through alternative means unnecessarily end up in criminal courts, adding even more pressure to a justice system that is already struggling to keep pace with even the process itself.
So let's put all of these pieces together. A pattern begins to emerge. The police say they are overwhelmed. The courts say they have too many cases. Correctional centers say they are overcrowded. The Legal Aid Council is expected to support indigent defendants while state governments prosecute the majority of criminal offenses. So this is no longer just a correctional service issue. We're looking at a much larger matter here. It's a criminal justice issue. And unless every institution plays its part, overcrowding will remain a recurring problem, no matter how many inmates are released during periodic decongestion exercises. So we have to address the issue of the police saying they are overwhelmed, with most of the cases that come to their table. We also have to look at the courts who are saying, look, we're being bombarded by quite a lot of litigations. And then the prisons themselves who do not have enough facilities to house those people who may be suspects or those of them who've been found guilty of some of these crimes. So we have to look at all of them together at the same time and find a lasting solution.
I mean, it's an overhauling of the system at this point. Let's look at all of the sides. Perhaps, I mean, the biggest lesson from this is that justice must not only be fair, but it must also be timely. A correctional center should never become a place where people simply wait endlessly for their cases to move on. You highlighted that some, even in prison, go ahead to take courses, learn some skills. It's been reported to say that, I mean, we had the other day, Shore in the studio, one of the presidential aspirants now, who said he met someone while he was in Kuje, who is now doing his PhD. Now, he did that because he had to make efforts, not because the system made effort for him to be able to even do all of this academic that he was doing or he is doing now. It's because he made effort. He tried out of his own way to see how that can play out. But you call the place a correctional facility. It means when you get there, you should be able to realize your faults and correct it and come out a better person. But sometimes the cases are of the opposite. They come out, different. But then every unnecessary delay, it affects not just the accused person, but also victims seeking closure, families waiting for answers, and taxpayers funding an already overstretched correctional system. So at this point, we'd like to hear from you this morning. Should Nigeria introduce strict time limits for concluding criminal trials involving awaiting trial inmates, or should bail conditions be reviewed to make them more realistic, while still protecting the integrity of the justice system? We can't falter, we can't water it down. And should states establish and manage their own correctional facilities, as some legal experts have suggested over time? If we're going to establish state police, should states now have also their state correctional facility? We'd like to hear your thoughts on this matter.